I'm Jill Morrison-Jonas with the Village Institute for Psychotherapy here in New York City, and I just wanted to come out and quickly tell everybody thank you so much for coming out to hear Josh's talk on rage, chronic pain, and the mind-body connection. We're really thrilled to be here tonight. And we'd like to give a big thank you to the Strand bookstore for letting us use their space for our event. We're hopefully going to have a lot more events like this coming up, so check in with the Village Institute. We have some brochures back there about our group therapy. If anybody, might as well throw that out there if you guys want to check it out. And now I'd like to introduce the clinical director of the Village Institute for Psychotherapy, Josh Jonas.
Hello. Hey, can you guys hear me okay? Yeah? Okay, cool. So really excited to see all of you here. Wow, I didn't know there was going to be this many of you. So I don't know if this is what I should start with, but I was just thinking that the title of, I've been working so hard, so focused on all the stuff I wanted to talk to you guys about, I didn't realize that the title, it's not there, but the title of our talk also kind of sounds like the lineup at a music festival. So I was just realizing that. Like Jill said, I want to thank the Strand for letting us be here. I'm excited and honored and grateful to be able to talk to you guys about this topic called rage, chronic pain, and the mind-body connection. So to begin with, rage, I think as we move along, the rage part will begin to make sense. Chronic pain is, to me, it's such an important topic because it's really the tip of the spear of so many things. So, for example, there's a store right next door here called Forbidden Planet, and if you go into this store, it's a huge place that sells comic books. And I don't know, but I've heard. And if you go into this store and you ask one of the guys that works there, hey, could we talk about comics? They'll go, whoa, yeah. I mean, yes, we can talk about comics, but comics are not just about comics. Comics are about archetype and myth and society. So if you're going to talk about comics, you can talk about comics, but when you talk about comics, you're not just talking about comics. And so that's what chronic pain is to me. It's the tip of the spear of so much more. And then this thing called the mind-body connection. And so here's the thing. When it comes to the mind-body connection, I am not a woo-woo guy. And there's this thing about the phrase mind-body connection where, at least to me, it feels like you have to be holding your crystals in order to talk about this thing. And that's so not the case. And so I want us to be able to talk about this thing in a way that feels very concrete and very understandable so that you can take something with you. And so I was thinking that we are here in the Strand. And if there's any place that really understands the power of story, it's this place here. And so I wanted to begin by telling you a story. And I was thinking that the roots of this thing that I want to talk about begin in childhood. And so the early parts of my childhood were spent with me trying to get as close as I could to my father, which on the one hand was difficult because my father was very angry. But on the other hand, it was kind of easy because my dad was also a terrific napper. And so he had a very specific way, I'll show you, he had a very specific way in which he would do this. He had a move where he would cross his arm and he would put his head down like this and then just out on any couch or big chair. And so when I was a kid, there was always just enough room for me to kind of like squeeze in there. And I would copy his stance, and I wouldn't fall asleep because I'd be very aware that he was there. But I would lie next to him, and this is how I would get to spend a lot of time next to my dad. And there was one time in particular where I got to spend a long time lying next to my father, and we were taking a family trip to Florida. And usually, we were driving there. And so whenever we would drive anywhere, it was always my father in the driver's seat, mom in the passenger seat, and me in the back. And so every trip, dad passenger seat, or dad driver's seat, mom passenger seat, and me in the back. And this one time in particular, my mother was in the driver's seat, and my father was not in the passenger seat. My father was lying down in the back seat. And so I, 5-year-old me, this was like my little version of Halley's Comet, because it was like, this is never happening again. You better get down on this while you got the chance. So I went on the floor of the back seat. This is before we knew seatbelts were like a thing. And I got on the floor, and I just reveled in all of this time that I got to lie next to my father. And now what I didn't know, or what I couldn't really comprehend, is that the reason that he was lying in the back seat of the car was that he was in excruciating back pain. And that the only way that he could bear to be in the car was to lie down in the back seat. And so it was actually my father's physical pain that allowed me to get as close as I wanted to get to him. So when you grow up with an angry father and a shrinky mom, my mom was and is a psychologist. When you grow up with that pairing, what happens is you end up going to therapy early. And which I did. I went to therapy very early, and I don't remember a ton of this therapy, which is probably a whole other thing. But the first thing my first real kind of therapy memory is being picked up by my father, and we get in the car, and he looks at the clock on the dashboard, and he goes, "Ooh, Howard Stern is on." And I said, "Who's Howard Stern?" And he flips on the radio, and the very first thing I hear Howard say is, he says, "Robin, God's not going to punish me if you don't eat gefilte fish for Passover." And so as a Jewish kid, that was it. I was hooked, and I listened to Howard every morning before junior high, every morning before high school, and he was really one of the things that helped me get through high school. Because, to be shrinky here for just a moment, one of the things that happens when you grow up around anger is that you split. And I don't mean like Lenny Bruce split. I mean, what happens is psychologically you split. And what happens is everything is bad or good. And anger is bad, and not being angry is good. And I wanted to be good, so I walked around not angry. So it was also at this time that I had my first chronic physical pain. I played soccer when I was in high school. One game, the goalie did not show up, and so I said, "I'll do it." And I loved it. I threw myself all over the place. I got all the aggression out. And when I woke up the next day, I had this just excruciating pain in my back. So I go to a doctor's, like a chiropractor or something, that kind of works it out. And that pain went away. But what I was left with was this pain that went from my back down my leg. And this was the pain that I became intimately involved with over the next few years. So what would happen is I would go from doctor to doctor to doctor, and they basically all said the same thing. They would go, "What'd the last guy say?" And I would tell them. And then they would go, "Okay, that guy didn't know what he was talking about. Here's what you have, and do this." And so I was told that I had, my muscles were tight. I was told that I pulled a muscle from carrying something too heavy. I was told my spine was weird because my back went in too much. I was told one leg was shorter than the other, and I was told that my hamstrings were too weak and my quads were too strong. And so I would do what they told me to do, and I would get little to no relief. This went on for so long that at one point my dad said to me, "I heard about this guy who gives a lecture. And his name is like Saw or something, and you go to this lecture, and there are people who go to this lecture who are scheduled for back surgery. They're in such awful pain, and this guy gives a lecture and people are cured." And I was like, "Yeah, Dad, they have names for things like that. They're called cults." So I get to college, and now my back pain and leg pain basically graduates to the next level. So more doctors, and now I'm herniated disc or bulging disc, and perhaps sciatica, and still no relief. So now I am hobbling around all over the place, and I am becoming a drag. It's also at this time that Howard Stern came out with his first book. And this is where I'm going to sound a little bit like Grandpa Jonas, but this is before the internet. And so you couldn't just like get information about people. So Howard's book coming out was a huge deal. So I went to Boston University, so I got as quickly as I could. I went down to the Tower Records on Newbury Street. I grabbed a copy of Howard Stern's Private Parts. I brought it back to my apartment, opened the book, and on the first page there was a dedication. And on the dedication, he had dedicated his book to 3 people: his parents, his wife, and to a Dr. John Sarno who, quote, cured me of my back pain and OCD. A week later, my college girlfriend breaks up with me. Now, I was a theater major in college, and at BU don't allow you to major in theater unless you're wildly insecure and you kind of hate yourself. So she breaks up with me, and I remember when it happened that I said to myself, I am not going to allow this to affect me. And the next day, I wake up and I can't move. I can't move. The pain in my leg is so bad that I can barely roll over. So I kind of make my way out of bed, and I go to the phone and I call my mom, and I say, Mom, she's in New York, can you find the number of this Sarno guy and maybe make an appointment? And she says, well, why don't I get the number and you write it down and you can call him? And I said, well, the closest thing to write with is on the other side of the room, and I can't move. I'm stuck. So call Sarno, make an appointment, and they say, before you come in, read his book. And we're here at the Strand, so go buy the book. So I read this book, and I see myself on almost every page. It was kind of like religious. And the premise of the book, and now this is where some of you are going to maybe go, yes! And then some of you are going to go, this guy is nuts. So I'm just going to need you all to like dig for a minute. Because the premise of the book is that even if you are told it's from an injury or a structural abnormality like I was, the premise of the book, and it's true, is that the majority of chronic pain that we all experience comes from feelings that we do not want to feel, predominantly rage, in our attempts to be perfect and good. I want to say that one more time. The majority of chronic pain that we experience comes from feelings that you don't want to feel, predominantly rage, in our attempts to be perfect and good. So anger bad, not angry good. I wanted to be good. I walked around not angry. So I go meet with Sarno, and he tells me that what I have, though I've been diagnosed 1,000 different ways, is actually what he says millions of Americans have, and it's this thing called TMS, which stands for tension myositis syndrome. And what TMS does is it just restricts blood flow to certain parts of your body. That restriction of blood flow results in oxygen deprivation, and that lack of oxygen is wildly painful and also completely harmless. So I meet with Sarno, and I go to the cult lecture, and I get relief. For the first time in a long time, I am walking around pain-free. And when you are drowning for a while, just being back at sea level can be euphoric. But the thing is, like I said, the main culprit here is rage. And sometimes rage can hide out in very interesting places. So I graduated college, I came here to New York, and after a little while, I got cast on my first lead in a play. And one night, some friends came up to me and they said, hey, we're coming, we're gonna be in the audience tonight. And I back then, I could not tell you why, but when they told me this, I just felt angry. So I make it through the play, and the director of the play comes up to me. I remember this so well. I'm leaning against a wall, and the director of the play comes up to me, and she says, there was someone in the audience tonight who saw you in the play, and he's casting a film, and he wants you to audition for him tomorrow. And I said, great. And I pushed away from the wall, and it was like the sequel to the horror movie. The monster was back, and this awful pain ran down my leg. So I kind of make my way, I hobble out of the theater, I get home, 104th and Columbus, and by the time I get home, it takes me about half an hour to go up about 4 flights of stairs in this excruciating, scary pain. So I get through the front door, and I plop myself down, and I just start talking to myself, and I go, okay, so friends say we're gonna be in the audience tonight, and you get angry. And then someone in the audience says, hey, come audition for me, and you can't walk. And that's when I said to myself, Jonas, there is something going on between you and the audience. So, what do you do? What do you do when you have this weird, effed up relationship with the audience? Well, what you do is you write a one-person show, where the only way it could be successful is if you can build an intimate relationship with that audience. So it would be like if you had this insanely intense fear of flying, and then you said, I think I want to be a pilot. And I wanted to be a pilot. And when you are angry and have a chip on your shoulder and something to prove, it can give you quite a motor. And so this play that I wrote got picked up and produced off Broadway and directed by a man that would go on to become a mentor of mine. And his name is, and I'm grateful to have him in my life, his name is Larry Moss. And there are so many things I could talk about in terms of the lessons that I learned from Larry. But the thing I want everyone here to know is that Larry is a human experience genius. And he gave me a moment that forever changed my life. So Larry and I got to know each other very well, and we would rehearse every day. And at this point, I still had pain going on that I just didn't really tell anyone about. And one day, we're rehearsing a part of the play that I thought was fairly benign. It was about this kid who liked a girl, and she wrote his phone number on his hand. So you can see the themes I was working with here. And the line was, and written on my palm was her phone number. So we're working, and I just go, and written on my palm was her phone number. And Larry just goes, okay, Josh, I'm going to stop you right there. And he's looking at me, really looking through me. And he just says, Josh, the audience is not your father. And I said, what? And he says it again. He says, the audience is not your father. And there's a very weird thing that happens when someone says something to you that in every cell of your body you know to be true, that there's really nothing to do except kind of sit in it or stand in it for a while. And so that's what I did. And he said it to me one more time, Josh, the audience is not your father. They want to love you. You need to talk to him. And I was like, oh, fucking Larry. Because I didn't want to. I did not want to talk to my dad because two reasons. First of all, he and I had come a very long way. And the person he was when I was a little kid is not the person he is today. And the second reason is that the people that we are the most angry with are also the people that we love the most. And so I didn't want to hurt him. I did not want him to think that something that happened years ago could be affecting me today. But I also knew that Larry was like a damn human X-ray, and he was probably onto something, and so that I should go talk to my dad, and I did. I spoke to him that night, and we're sitting there just kind of hanging out, and he always wanted to know how rehearsals were going. So he asked me how they're going, and I took this very kind of inarticulate leap, and I just start babbling about this thing with the audience and being angry and feeling judged, and then Larry's bizarro Star Wars, the audience is not your father thing. And my dad, if power comes from presence, my father did something so incredibly powerful. Completely non-defensively, he just said, Josh, this actually makes perfect sense to me. I get it. And it reminds me, you're reminding me of something. He said, when you were a little kid, I'd say around 4 or 5 years old, he said, you'd come running in the room and you'd say something funny or witty. And I would think that you heard this somewhere else and you were coming in and repeating it. He said, so then it'd happen again. You'd come running into the room and you'd say something, be funny. And again, I would think you heard this somewhere and you were coming in and repeating it. And he said, and then there was this one time where we were sitting around, we were having dinner. He said, I can't tell you what it is that we were talking about, but you said something that was a witty thing to say, and I realized there was no way you could have heard this anywhere else because it was so connected to what we were talking about in that moment. And I realized that I had been doubting who you were this entire time. And the reason I was doubting you, really, is because I didn't think that I could have a smart son. And that has nothing to do with you. That's me. And when my father said this to me, it was like something just let go. First of all, any pain that was there just went away. And but also it was like there was all these clenched fists around my insides, and they just kind of went like that. Because after that, everything just made sense, because I had realized that I had been fighting for so long to get my dad, the audience, to love me. And there was a part of me that was really angry that I had to fight. But the thing is, I also then understood that if there was anyone who could really understand this, it was my dad. Because that trip that we were taking where we were driving to Florida, where he's laying down in the back seat, that was a trip for us to go visit his father. And his father, just like mine, was a very good man. And sometimes good people do harmful things for very innocent reasons. And his dad, way more than my dad, wanted his son to be tough. And I get it. I do. Ironically, I have a son. He's 3. He's perfect. And I want him to be tough. I do. And I am a big believer in raising good, strong men, which is a whole other talk. But when parents somehow convey the message that the connection and love that their kids need is predicated on them having to be perfect and good, those kids end up craving the imperfect parts of their parents. Or rather, a better way to put it is the parts that their parents believe to be imperfect. And so for me, that was the softer, more understanding part of my father. And so that is why this topic, or one of the reasons why this topic is so important to me, because there are so many people walking around in physical pain and emotional pain, and oftentimes they're really the same thing. And one of the things that I do is I help people to try to move through this pain, and I know what it's like to be in really debilitating physical pain, and then to be able to get some relief. And so I thought what I would do now is I just wanted to give you guys the kind of nuts and bolts of TMS, tension myositis syndrome, and psychophysical pain. And I use the term psychophysical as opposed to psychosomatic, because psychosomatic has the connotation that you're effed up and it's all in your head, as opposed to psychophysical, where it's understood that there is real physical pain happening in the body. The only difference is the cause, and the cause is not structural. So I just want to quickly give a quick history here. And so bear with me, because I'm going to talk about Freud for like a minute and a half. And the reason I want to talk about Freud quickly is just simply put, he discovered certain dynamics. He explained and certain things that are just so important if we're going to really understand chronic pain. So the first thing I just want to say, very simply put, is that Freud was the first person to discover and to really understand that we can, in fact, have feelings that we do not feel. That there can be things going on inside of us below our level of consciousness. The next of his ideas that I want to say is that below that level of consciousness is this part of the psyche that he called the id. And the id is just basically every 1.5-year-old child that you know. It is completely narcissistic, completely pleasure-seeking, and completely dependent. And this is a part of us that never goes away. And when anything goes against the grain of this part of us in terms of what we want and need, rage can develop. The last of his ideas that I just also want to explain is that he was also the first person to discover that we can, in fact, have physical symptoms that are coming from emotions. So, and you can read all about it in a ton of his cases and all that kind of stuff, but he was the first person to realize there are physical symptoms going on here, and the cause is emotional. So now there are two differences that I want to point out quickly. One is that Freud believed that the physical symptoms that were being produced were really because it was the patient's unconscious wish to punish themselves. And that's not true. Chronic pain is designed to distract, not to punish. And the other thing quickly that I want to say is that, at least in all of the cases that he wrote about, Freud, with people who were producing physical symptoms, he characterized these people as having hysterical character organization. And I just want to say, chronic pain does not equal hysterical character organization. I mean, you could be, you might, but chronic pain does not equal that. So that's the first part of the history. The second part of the history that I want to give is just a quick history. This is going to sound exciting. A quick history on back pain. And the reason that I want to do this quickly is because of all the chronic pains out there: back pain, neck pain, leg pain, fibromyalgia, carpal tunnel, migraine. Of all the chronic pains that are out there, back pain is kind of number one with a bullet. So, I think we're all becoming more aware there's this opioid epidemic out there. The number one thing opioids are prescribed for is low back pain. So I just wanted to give you a quick history of back pain. And the quick history is just this. In the way that we see and know back pain today, up until World War II, there was no such thing as back pain. Up until World War II, everybody got ulcers. Then people started to understand that ulcers had a psychological component. Ulcers went away and back pain took off. So that's the quick history that I want to give you. Now I want to give the psychology of chronic pain. And the psychology of chronic pain is fairly simple. Not simplistic, but simple. And I actually think that's one of the reasons why the premise is so often dismissed, because a lot of you intellectual types really love the smell of your own farts, and you love things to be very complicated. But like Einstein said, things should be made as simple as possible and never simpler. So the psychology is just this. Pain, chronic pain is produced in the body to distract us from feelings that we do not want to feel. That's it. And if you've ever known anyone like myself who really battled and suffers with chronic pain, one of the things you'll notice is that their entire life becomes organized around this pain. Their entire life is about navigating this pain. So if you say, let's go to dinner, they might go, well, what are the seats like there? And should I bring a pillow or something? Because I got to figure out what it's going to be like. If you say, let's go for a walk, they'll go, well, where are we going? How long are we going to walk? Because I may have to sit down for a little while because the pain is going to start. The entire life becomes focused on how do I deal with this pain, and that is exactly the point. It is made to distract, and the main thing it is designed to distract from is rage. Rage in the unconscious, which I know sounds so shrinky. It's like rage in the unconscious, dude. But that's what it is. And so there are basically three places that rage comes from. But actually, before I say that, I want to say, what did I want to say? Oh, yeah. That I keep saying this word over and over, rage. And I think this might be helpful in understanding more of what I'm talking about. When I say rage, a way to think about it is really rage that will cost us. So, for example, there's a reason why so many people have road rage, because it's easy. You're protected in this little box, and you can scream your face off and sound like an idiot, and nothing happens. And so nobody is unconsciously angry at the traffic. But when you are angry at a spouse or a parent or a child or work, these are things that we fear will cost us and cost us too much. And so pain happens. So I just wanted to throw that out there because that might be a helpful way to understand the type of rage that we're talking about here. And now there are three places that rage comes from. And the first place that I want to say it comes from is from incidents in childhood. And so just for example, that's why so many people that experience a ton of trauma in childhood have a ton of chronic pain in adulthood. Now you can have a ton of chronic pain and not have a ton of trauma, and that also gets to the whole what counts as trauma, different talk. But just to say that one of the places that rage can come from incidents in childhood. Then another place that it can come from is just self-imposed pressures. So the story of myself in the play with the friends coming to see me, that was really about me putting this immense amount of pressure on myself. And then the third place it can come from is just the pressures of everyday life, kids, finances, work. Now, if there are any Buddhists here, you might be saying, well, all pressures are self-imposed. and there's really no such thing as the self. But I get that, but not now. So that's the three places where rage can come from, and now there's just two types of rage that I want to explain, and the first one is what I call kind of rage from an incident. So, for example, there's a reason why so many people can get chronic pain after, let's say, the death of a parent, because consciously they can be sad, depressed, mourning. Unconsciously they can be rageful that the parent has left. Among other things. Now, that's one, rage from an incident. The other type is what I kind of call rage from when the reservoir gets too full. So if you think of it this way, we all have a reservoir inside that can hold a certain amount of stuff. And if it gets full, then all you really need is like a dusting, and it can overflow and pain can be produced. So for example, about a week ago, I had a patient who, she said she had this interaction with her boss where she kind of had to bite her tongue because he was being annoying. And she said, later that day, I got this awful migraine. And she said, but I've had worse interactions with bosses, and I've had situations that were way tougher. I don't understand why I got pain. I got a migraine from this. And then she said all the classic questions, does this mean, am I that weak? Am I that fragile? But as we got into it, what came out was she had spent a week away with in-laws. And that whole entire week before, there was sort of moment after moment where she had to push it down and bite her tongue, and she was up to here. And so then all it took was one more incident where she had to hold it in, and the migraine developed. So those are the two types of rage. Kind of the last thing I want to say here is when I talk to people about this, or when I tell someone this, that this pain that you're experiencing, there's really nothing wrong with you. This is just there's nothing wrong with you. This is just really feelings that are distracting, or pain that's distracting you from emotions. When I tell people this, they love it. I'm kidding. It makes people really, really angry when you tell them this, which I get completely, because, first of all, it's like I come across like a vegan trying to hawk tofu, first of all, because it's like, of course you think this therapy guy, because you think everything is about feelings. You think the weather is controlled by feelings. So of course you're going to think that. But I get the anger, I do, because what they're feeling in that moment is completely misunderstood, because they're saying, look, I have a ton of physical pain going on here, and now you're trying to tell me this is about my feelings. This is not in my head. I'm in a lot of real pain. And the answer to that is yes, that is true. The only difference is the cause, and the cause is not structural. And like I said, I understand their anger, because nobody understands this. A couple of years ago, I was in a dermatologist's office. I'm fine. And I was in a dermatologist's office, and I'm waiting for him to come in, and I see on the book rack is the book The Divided Mind by Dr. John Sarno. So the dermatologist comes in, and I said, I got to ask, what gives with the Sarno book? And he goes, oh, well, psychology is my second favorite profession. And he goes, and I have so many people who come in here with a skin condition, I have to let them know that this is, in fact, there's nothing wrong. This is emotional. And I said, that, first of all, that's amazing. Secondly, I said, I have to ask you, when you tell people this, do they get angry? And he said, oh, yeah. He said, you know who gets the most angry? Therapists. And I said, you gotta be kidding me. He said, I had a woman in here a week ago who had this skin thing going on, and I told her that there was nothing really wrong. It was just, I told her the whole Sarno thing. And he said, and she got livid. She said, excuse me, do you know who I am? A psychologist. How dare you tell me that this is what's going on? So this is why this topic is kind of such a tough nut to crack, and why I wanted to sit up here with my dry mouth and talk to all of you about this, because it's a topic, like I said, that's so important to me. And so, look, I've talked a lot, and I told you my story here, and I kind of gave you the nuts and bolts of chronic pain. And really the reason I wanted to do it is because I just wanted to keep this conversation going and about chronic pain and the work of Sarno. And so we can have questions now. If people have questions, we can have a conversation or dialogue back and forth. But that's really everything that I had to say.
So, yeah, we've been talking a lot about the effects of pain.
Yeah.
But the effects of rage.
Yeah.
Which is like pain. Is kind of the talk. But I don't know that much about rage, and you've talked like personally, and you've talked a lot about how it's like living under the surface. Yeah. And how like we think there are other things going on, but really underneath it's rage. And I'm curious. Kind of where does it come from? Is it like shame? Is it a sense of injustice? I'm sure it can be a lot of things. And then how do we diagnose it? Because you don't want to just say, you're in pain, it's got to be rage. Mm-hmm. But it seems like you do say that, and so you probably have a good reason. And I'm just trying to understand, like, what is rage itself? Got it.
I think to me, the easiest way that I explain rage is enough ignored anger will. Oh, you can keep the microphone if you want, but enough ignored anger will turn into rage. That's kind of the way that I explain it. Now, so. And that's why I was giving the example of the id. Really, it's just to explain that we have in terms of human beings, we've got a lot of range. And so there are parts of us that want to go, that want to attack, that want to grow, that want to be of service, all of that stuff. But before we kind of get there, I think we have to be aware of just the certain parts. First of all, what's making us go? You know what I mean? Do I want to go, or do I feel a pressure to have to do this? Because if I don't do it, I'm going to feel that I'm terrible and awful. So I hope I'm answering your question here, but I think rage comes from, and I think it's all very personal. So I think it's, and again, like I said, that's why I give the example of the id. Anything that kind of goes against this very, very early dependent part of us. There's a part of us that that wants to be taken care of, that just wants to sit on the couch and eat Cheetos and watch SportsCenter. There's a part of us that has that in us, and that doesn't mean that you have to. It doesn't mean that you have to give into it. I mean, that's the other thing I think, is that people go, well, what does this mean exactly? So if I'm angry about this thing, I kind of have to let it. I have to let it take over, and I'm rageful now, so I'm angry about not going to work, so I just have to not go to work anymore. And no, but the beginning is really understanding those things that are making you rageful, and like I said, enough ignored anger over time will lead to rage. Am I answering your question, or it looks like you want to get more granular?
You're answering the question, but I guess it's like I'm kind of curious about anger too. It's like I'm not. It's like, okay, rage is like really serious anger, but then anger, right? It's like not sad. I mean, you kind of said it's like we're not getting what we want. It goes against what we want. And then so you kind of answered it. I'm still like, and then the second part though is like, all right, so if we can't just relieve it by getting angry, then how do we relieve it, the rage and the pain?
So that's a good question. There's a lot of ways. And so here's the thing. This is where it becomes completely subjective, and I'm not trying to cop out here, but this is where it becomes completely subjective in a way, in that this is sort of part one of your question, but it becomes completely subjective in that we first have to understand these things that are making us really, really angry. And then, well, what do you do? I mean, the beginning is, and when you say what do you do, I'm assuming you're talking about in terms of trying to get rid of physical pain. So this is the thing that's interesting, and again, you can read about this stuff, but different people have different experiences. There are people who've learned this concept that that hear this is kind of what happened to me. Then I had some bouts, but you hear this concept and it just feels so self-evident. You just go, oh wow, yeah, I get it. And then and then all of a sudden it's kind of like, it feels like the end of The Sixth Sense. Like all of a sudden you're putting together these pieces. You start going, oh, that's why that was like that. And that's why it happened there. And that's why there are all these things where I couldn't get better and da-da-da-da. It starts to fill in and starts to make sense. And so sometimes just the understanding of this is really what it is can make it go away. Because, I mean, another way that I kind of explain it is that if the only reason that I was really sitting here talking to you, right? If the only reason I was sitting here talking to you is that I didn't want you to look behind you, I would just keep talking and talking and talking because I don't want you to turn behind you. I don't want you to look behind you. The moment you then turn around, if my only reason for talking is for you to not look around, I'll stop. Because there's no more reason for me to keep talking. So, that's another way in which, so when we really sort of key in on what it is, it can go away. And then also, like I said, this is why I said it has to do with rage that will cost us. When a lot of people start to first realize this, they'll kind of go after like the cheap rage. Like I had somebody go, I realized I was really angry at my health insurance website. Because it was just so annoying to navigate, and I was going, is that really? So do I have to not be angry at the website in order for my pain to go away? And I was saying, first of all, it's not about not being angry. It's about actually understanding what the anger is and becoming a lot more in touch with it. And like I said, you're not going to. That's not what's going to cause it. It's always things that we go, well, I can't be angry at that because what would that mean? What would that make me? Who would I be? You know, what kind of a son would I be if I was angry at so-and-so? You know, and that's why I'm saying that our feelings are very irrational, but they're also very real. And so we get worried that our feelings are completely irrational and therefore we can't give in to them. You know what I mean? And again, like I said, it's sort of like a child. You want to really know what's happening with your child. You want to really understand what's happening with your child. That doesn't mean that they run the show. That doesn't mean that if they throw a temper tantrum that you do whatever you want them to do, right? But that doesn't mean you just ignore them. If you ignore them, they're going to cry louder and louder and louder and louder and louder and louder and louder. That's kind of what happens with the pain too. So if you can really key into it and understand it, you don't have to let it run the show, but you do really want to know what it's about. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that totally answers my question.
Okay, fantastic.
Hi.
Hey.
So I guess I'm wondering, it sounds like in your story, you were very fortunate in that there was change in where your rage was coming from in your father. So as a therapist also, I wonder how to also navigate through the helplessness that might come with knowing people's parents don't see that change, and the rage is actually coming from a really like a place where there's no fixing it, there's no changing it. So how do you help somebody who is feeling that pain and has that rage and they know it's going to stay there because that relationship just isn't changing?
They're screwed. I'm kidding. The good news here is, yeah, I was very fortunate that I had this great conversation with my dad, and he said this thing to me that like it really did. It kind of just was like, whoa. But the good news is, and again, there's a lot of stuff you can read. The good news is that's not mandatory. That you don't need that cathartic, end of Act 1 moment. You don't need that. You can if you can become in touch with the things that you're really, really rageful about. It can dissipate. Again, like I said, the first time I got a ton of relief in terms of that pain was when I just really started to realize, oh, that's what this is. And then you really change your life in terms of how you live your life and how you go about treating it in a completely different way. So you don't need the parent to say, hey, sorry. You don't need that. What you need to do is, now it's not just an intellectual endeavor. That was also a mistake I made, and I think I see other people do that too, is they'll be very intellectual about it. And they'll go, yeah, I get it. I'm angry at my mom. I understand. Yeah, I get that. And that's neck up. That's just like that. And so it's not that you have to have a primal scream weekend and because you're never going to, this is the thing about the unconscious, you're never going to feel all of it, and that's okay. It's just about feeling some anger, being able to, what I used to do when I first learned about this is because sometimes it can feel very confusing, because it's like, feels like trying to unlock a puzzle. You're like, well, how do I know what I'm angry at? Maybe it's this, maybe it's that, So I would do this thing where I would just walk down the street, and I said I'm not a woo-woo guy, but I would walk down the street and I would kind of like feel my breath, and then I would just go, okay, what could I possibly be angry at right now? I would just be I would just go, what could I be angry at that I don't want to be angry at right now? And after a while, you kind of get good at it. It's kind of like there's that old toy, I don't know what it was, where you have to like drop this hook down and like catch a thing. Is that yeah, whatever. So after a while, it feels like that, where you're kind of like fishing around, and all of a sudden you'll like hop from thing to thing, and you go, no, and then you'll go, what about this? And you go, oh. And for me, it's always like, yeah, because I don't want to be angry about that. So that, yeah, that's probably something. And then I would see myself kind of distract myself from it. I would go, oh, the Mets lost, which is very easy to be distracted from because they lose all the time. And so, but I would distract myself and then go, wow, it's amazing how when I key in on the thing, I want to distract myself from it. I want to go away. So that long answer just to say, you don't need that cathartic moment with another person. You don't.
Thanks. I guess I'm just curious in terms of this concept of, to paraphrase what you were saying, that chronic pain manifests when you're avoiding feeling, what are you saying? You're avoiding feeling what you don't want to feel.
Feelings that we don't want to feel.
Right.
Yeah.
And I guess in my opinion, that's just a part of the human condition. And so I'm curious in how that manifests in some people as chronic pain, and in other people it doesn't. Mm-hmm. And also tangentially to that question, how do you deal with patients who feel a sense of responsibility or blame? Because I know that you said that like this doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you, but I assume you must also encourage patients to take responsibility for the fact that they're not feeling something that they otherwise might not be aware of, if I'm being articulate in that question.
I'm sorry, say it one more time.
I guess what I'm wondering
keep going.
is just I do think there's a nuanced difference between blame and responsibility, but how you encourage patients to take responsibility, to take action and be like, you need to be feeling something that you're avoiding feeling without putting blame on them for experiencing the chronic pain. Does that differentiation make sense?
Yes, and that's why. So it's interesting so part of the reason why I was saying that in a way, that's kind of like, that's why I said, Freud's original idea was that people were producing chronic pain because they wanted to somehow punish themselves, right? So then what would happen is a lot of people I don't want to do a whole like medical bashing thing, but I'm just saying a lot of people would use that idea, oh, this is just because you unconsciously want to punish yourself. And they would go, that's why all of these people are not getting better. That's why all of these people are experiencing chronic pain, because really we've done the things that need to be done and they should be getting better, but because they want to punish themselves, they're not getting better. And to me, that's blaming. Mm-hmm. So when you say to someone, there are feelings going on that you don't want to feel, that by itself, you're right. That is part of the human experience. I don't think that in itself is blaming. But what you're talking about, it's not an easy thing. This let's call it diagnosis of TMS. Only about 10 to 20% of people accept the diagnosis because there's a lot of feelings that come along with it. That's why I was saying, you say this to someone and the first thing they want to say is F you. I'm in a lot of pain here. Now you're going to tell me it's because I'm not feeling my feelings? Screw you. I think I was probably, it's funny, I was probably the outlier that when I read this, and I think because I was so at my wit's end, there are some people who are at their wit's end in terms of experiencing chronic pain. And so when they read this or they find out about this, it's this hallelujah moment because it just makes sense. Then there are other people who go, I completely reject this. I think that's BS. I'm in a lot of pain. I don't really think that this amount of pain could be just be caused by feelings. And I'm not gonna put my forearm or my elbow on their emotional pain and go, you need to feel it. But I'm just gonna say it may be a tough road for them if they're going, let me put it this way. Something I often will say to patients is the problem is not your feelings. The problem is your feelings about your feelings. Mm-hmm. And so I think by itself, it's just the feeling. If you're feeling shame about having this kind of rage inside of you, then that's where therapy comes in. That's where you need to do some couples therapy with yourself, because that's more about your feelings about having those feelings. The rage is just the rage. Like I said, it's on its own, it's fine. Meaning, rage by itself never did anything. It's the action. So if you feel it, So I hope this answers your question a little bit. It doesn't have to be blaming. If there is a feeling of blame, especially if there's a ton of trauma, then maybe some therapy to figure out why they have so many feelings about the feelings that they have. But the rage is just the rage, if that makes sense.
Yes. Sorry.
It's totally cool. I had my hand at like half mast. It's less of a question and more of like a comment, if that's allowed. Is that okay? It's kind of a series of, but I like the example of the dermatologist, and I also see why it's so hard for people to understand that. It's like, I'm going to you, I want you to provide a service, I want to give you money, I want you to fix it. And for them, or that dermatologist in this example, to be like, well, there's a book for $24.95 by Sarno that you could buy. Like, that goes against everything that we know. That goes against everything that we believe is that we'll be able to just like go pay someone to fix this, just like take it away. So it's kind of like fighting ourselves in that. And I was thinking that I identified with so much of your story too. And I work in the job that I work and the service that I provide a myriad of it. And at a job that I particularly hated, on a day that I particularly didn't want to be there, a person came in and asked for like, when I was very financially like unstable, asked for like the cheapest service, and my back went out. Immediately. I dropped to my knees. I felt so uncomfortable. I was like, oh my God, dude, I'm so sorry. And before anyone gets any wild ideas, I'm a tattooer. It's not like a thing. But he came in, he wanted this like really cheap thing. And I was like, my supplies cost more than this. I don't want to do this. I don't want to be at the shop. All this kind of stuff happened. Right. And then I got so in my head about the fact that I'm on my knees and I just met this kid and he works at Urban Outfitters and I shop there. And like, what's he going to think and what do I do and this has never happened before. And I felt so bad, and that spiraled, and that sucked. And I made my way to like a bench and laid down, and I Googled, "Is back pain in your mind?" And I like laid there, and I was like, there's got to be a correlation by the fact that like I'm so like I hate this place. I need money. This kid wants this for $30. Are you kidding me? Like the jeans cost more than that. This is not going to happen. But like through all of that, it was like definitely like a realization for me that there was a correlation in these things, and that there was something in my mind that was screwing at my body, and it was like I was unable to work or perform. And it was awful. And I loved hearing that, and I definitely, the ulcer thing, that makes so much sense to like know that your body stores stress and creates ulcers. Like I get that. And then to be like, oh, it's replaced with that. So that wasn't in what I like read on Wikipedia, but it should have been. Maybe we'll add an addendum later.
Absolutely.
It's been great to hear you so far. I just wanted to get my hand up.
Thank you. I'm so sorry about that.
Is this link to chronic pain particular to rage, or does it exist with, I think you touched on this over here, but does that connect also with shame or fear? and pain, or are they different? Just curious on feelings other than rage.
Good question, Yuri. Yes, the prime culprit is rage. Now, it can be other things as well. It can be shame. It can be deep sadness. And, at times, these things kind of get commingled. You can have, you can have a cocktail. You can have rageful sadness. You can have tears of rage. And so, yes, I think part of the reason that rage is the prime culprit, if this is also helpful to your answer, is I had kind of a debate with someone about they thought it was sadness, and I was saying it was rage, and I was saying I don't think the prime culprit is sadness, because sadness sort of, however you want to put it, sort of generally speaking, if we just sort of speak generally, sadness does not necessarily threaten a relationship. It's rage that I think people get very scared of and feel that if that were to come out, it would destroy things. And so I think that's why I think rage is really is the prime one, is because of all of the emotions that we can feel. Rage has the greatest probability of severing connection. And maybe we've talked about this, but I always, one of the things I say is that we are born biologically needing to connect. And so because of that, if something's going to get in that way, we'll do whatever we have to do to keep that connection, even if it's not feeling rage. And I don't think sadness severs connection in the way that rage does. Is that? Yeah. Okay, cool.
Again, not so much a question as to talking about rage. I sort of think of it as an unresolved issue, and the frustration of not being able to resolve that issue, and that becomes the rage, because the person's so frustrated they don't know what else to do. So all of the anger comes up and comes out as rage, 'cause they don't know what else to do.
Yeah. I mean, that's a very good another way to put it. Yeah, it's a lot of things unresolved. A lot of things unresolved. And then also sometimes it can also be, I really don't want to be at this whatever today, or I don't want to, I have to go to this thing and I don't want to go to this thing. And but yeah, absolutely.
We got time for a couple of quick ones.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hey.
Cool chat. Thank you. I thought it was cool if you accept the premise to say physical pain can be created by emotions. I'm curious to think where it leaves us and what do we do with that, and say, is there a way we can be preventative about it if you're not in pain or something like that? Or is pain like the prerequisite to understanding all of this?
Good question. So, excuse me, and let me know if I'm answering your question. Couple of things. It's kind of like, this might be a weird analogy here, but in AA they have the 12 steps, right? And in the 12 steps, the first step is about the thing you're in the anonymous group for. So let's just say Alcoholics Anonymous. The first step is about the substance. Steps 2 through 12 never mention the substance again, and it's all about just how you could live a good life. And steps 2 through 12, anybody could do, and at the end of it, they would go, I'm kind of a better person than I was before I started these 12 steps. So all of this to say is that you don't have to be part of the Rageful Pain Club to do these things that can get you more in touch with what's going on, number one. Number two, I also want to say, I'm really glad you asked this question, really everything that I'm talking about is actually preventative medicine. This is all preventative. Once you have a bout, you have to kind of just let it take its course. So really everything that I'm talking about here is preventative. It's about figuring out how to live in a way where pain doesn't run your life, and where pain doesn't just come out of nowhere and we have no idea where it's coming from. So in a way, it's all preventative in that way. Does that help? Is that okay? Yeah.
This is our last question of the evening. Sorry.
Hi.
Hey.
I'm wondering, is there a reason why rage manifests specifically as back pain and not elsewhere in the body?
So it does register in other. It's a really good question. It does register in other places in the body. I was using back pain because it's just, it's like it's the Beatles of chronic pain. It's everyone, So, but it does in like I said, neck pain, leg pain. Fibromyalgia, carpal tunnel. These are all things that have to do with rage. And so I know some very kind of psychoanalytic people want to really dive into, well, why is it in your back, or why is it your leg, or what does that mean? And you don't have to do that. But to answer your question, it's not just back pain. And the one other thing I want to say is it really has to do with, and this is why I was talking about ulcers, and they have other studies about this that are kind of nuts. There was this whole Norwegian study where people just in Norway were getting whiplash for some reason, nowhere else but Norway had whiplash, and they were going, why do, and it was the thing du jour. And so what happens is the reason it goes into our back is that kind of becomes the thing. It's not to be so shrinky here, but it's like, the collective unconscious, we sort of pick up on whatever the hip thing is, and that becomes the thing. Yeah.
I think that's a good note to end on.
Okay.
Thank you, Josh,
everybody.
for having
This was
talk
really
with
great.
us
Thank you
tonight.
so much.